So looking back a little over 34 years now, my wife and I only had so much to do with the planning of our wedding. For a variety of reasons, Rachel's mom planned almost every element of the wedding. We got to pick the invitations. We got to pick some of the guests. And we got to pick the song for the traditional first dance. Everything else, as I recall, was Rachel's mom coming to us and saying, "This is what I'm thinking we should do for your wedding. Is that okay?" And the inflection to her voice said, "You may as well say yes, because I'm going to do it anyway." And that was actually fine with us. We weren't so much concerned about the pageantry of it all. I also think Rachel got to help a little bit with the seating arrangements. You know, who sits at what table? And that's very important at a reception. Because you don't want to set up something that you know is going to be a socially awkward environment. You don't want to put Aunt Minnie, the good Methodist teetotaler, at the same table with Uncle Billy, who's working his way through his third liver. And I think we had both at our wedding. So that's kind of what Jesus was talking about a little bit, is the importance of seating. That got me to wondering. 2,000 years ago, when you invited Jesus to a wedding, or if you invited Jesus to a big banquet, formal meeting, how did you figure out the seating plan? And you can hear the conversations. Well, you can't put Jesus at the table with the Sadducees because they're going to start arguing about the resurrection. You can't put Jesus at the table with the Pharisees because they're going to be trying to trip him up and he's going to be talking about how they're all hypocrites. And you can't put Jesus with his family because they all think he's crazy. So just trying to figure out where to put Jesus had to be a treat. And we know that these things matter. Appearances matter. In social situations, where people sit at an event can reflect very important social realities. Human beings are social animals. Where they sit matters. We have an illustration here. No sign.
This is the psychiatrist's office. Cleaning counts, which chair are you sitting? Oh, yeah. I'm supposed to pick a chair? Anybody you like? I'm not here.
Oh, it doesn't make any difference.
Ignore me, anywhere you want.
Just pick any chair, just sit wherever.
So it matters. Whether it's in a psychiatrist's office or something maybe a little more common, maybe it's who you ate lunch with when you were in school. In school. When I was in high school, ate lunch at school. And where you sat in the lunchroom, what table you sat at, and who you sat with mattered because it helped define who you were. It's no surprise, I'm sure, that I sat at the cool table. I sat at the cool table, the one with the boys from the AV club and the boys from the science club. That was the cool table. And we weren't trying to hog being cool. You know, if there had been any girls that asked to sit at the table, we would have let them sit there. None of them ever did. I think they were intimidated by our coolness. That's what we told ourselves, I think. But if you think back to your own experience in school, maybe you might remember the same thing. Where you sat, who you sat with, mattered. And here in Luke, Jesus suddenly bursts out in this Miss Manners advice about etiquette. And he's saying it matters too. Jesus says, don't take the seat of honor. Because if somebody more important than you comes along, you'll just have to slink back to a lower seat. And you'll all be embarrassed. Instead, aim low and then let the host lift you up. Let the host come to you at the low spot and say, hey, come on, let's seat you at a better spot. Then when you're walking, you can have a little swagger to your step instead of just slinky. Back in that time and place, social status played heavily into where people sat. I keep saying sat and sitting and seats and things like that, but it really wasn't quite like that. In first century Palestine, at a formal banquet, the guests would sit at a big U-shaped table. They would sit around the edges of it. The middle was left open so that servants could come in there and serve food. Actually very practical. So the guests would be arrayed around the edge of the U. And the top spot, the primo spot, for the most important person, would either be at the middle of the top of the U, in the short part, would either be in the middle there or at the very left end of that. Depends on which sources you read. But from that spot, in descending order going on both sides, would be everybody else. It would be descending order of importance. Like I said, I keep saying seated and sat, and actually, when you ate a formal dinner, you reclined. If you were fancy, there would be little couches there, low couches. If you were not, there would be mats or pillows. And you would lie there on your left side, you'd be propped up on your left elbow, and you'd use your right hand to eat. Eating could be kind of messy because they didn't have utensils. They used bread if they were scooping it. Which sort of takes mashed potatoes right off the menu. So think about that. You're reclining there. You're starting to eat. And all of a sudden, the host comes up and he taps you on the leg and he says, can you stand up a minute? And you get up and he says, I'm going to have to ask you to move because somebody more important needs this spot. It would be embarrassing. That's where Jesus' advice comes from. And also the idea of reclining helps explain why the next position of importance to the guest of honor would be at his right hand. Because if you're reclining like this, it's very easy for you to talk to somebody on your right. Not so easy to talk to somebody on your left. It's just kind of a silent. So Jesus' answer to the whole problem of where to sit was to say, let someone else exalt you. Don't try to make yourself important. Because it's not all about you. It really isn't. It's not about how important you are. Because you're not. Don't we all know people who could really stand to hear that message every once in a while? Isn't this world well stocked with people who have an inflated sense of their own importance and are more than willing to let you know just how important they are? And to them, Jesus would say, I'm sorry to break it to you, but there's about 7 billion other people on this planet who are all just as important as you are. You are all important because God loves every one of you the same. So instead of throwing your shoulder out of joint trying to pat yourself on the back, you would say, let God do that for you. Jesus was throwing out very practical advice. And he wasn't just retweeting Proverbs 25, 6 and 7, verses 6 and 7, where it says, do not exalt yourself in the king's presence. It is better for him to say to you, come up here. That's the short version. Jesus wasn't just recycling that. He wasn't just reaching back into his knowledge of Scripture and pulling that forward and repeating that. He was also trying to educate people about what living was like in the kingdom of God. And that's why his next statement was to the host. He said, and you, don't invite your friends and your family to a dinner. Don't invite the rich neighbors and the powerful people. Instead, when you give a dinner, when you have a formal event, invite the poor and the crippled and the lame and the blind. And if you do that, you will be blessed. Because they can't do anything for you. In other words, Jesus was saying, don't invite people on the basis of how much you like them or what they can do for you, but instead share the wealth with those who have nothing. Share your good fortune with those who are struggling. Because those people matter. And this is pretty revolutionary talk 2,000 years ago. Because there was an inherent belief that people who were struggling, people who were poor, people who were crippled, for some reason, were being punished. So they had it coming. Jesus was turning that on its ear. So if you think about what he said, think, how different would the world look if people actually lived that way? Like I said, Jesus was trying to show us what it was like to live in the kingdom of God. He wasn't teaching an etiquette lesson. He was trying to tell his people how to show justice and mercy in this world, even in the little things. He was trying to show us a better way. He's trying to show us God's way. Imagine. Imagine the next White House state dinner. The ambassador from Upper Moldavia and her entourage are all seated nearest to the kitchen, while a bunch of people from a Baltimore homeless shelter are seated as guests of honor. How would the world react to something like that? What would the media say? Imagine at the next, $1,000 a plate fundraiser for a political party, if they didn't invite people who could donate the $1,000 a plate, but instead invited people who had nothing. Well, would the party leaders say? What would the people say? What would the media say? And the grown-up side of us just says, that's not the way the world works. Not really. You just can't do that. But deep down inside, when I said to imagine that, isn't there a part of you, at least, that maybe smiled a little bit at the idea and thought, maybe that's the way the world should work? If there was, if you did have that fleeting thought, then I'll leave you with one more thought. Maybe, if enough people cared and prayed for it, maybe if enough people wanted it, maybe if enough of God's people actually lived their lives as though they could summon that future, as unlikely as it is, and maybe it